Hello and welcome to episode number 71 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. Now, Gar, today with this episode is very special. It's that special time of the year that you and me love most of all, and it's when we kick off our season of holiday-themed shows. To get it kicked off today, we're going to start, being that Halloween's right around the corner, we chose to discuss the classic 1941 Universal monster movie, The Wolfman, of course, starring Lon Chaney Jr.
Yeah, when I was a kid, the movie came out in I think 1943.
Okay.
When I was a kid, I saw it for the first time back in the 60s.
Yeah.
And what I remember is, even though the movie was made 20 years earlier,
yeah,
I was still mesmerized by the transformation that they used to do when he went from being a human being and transforming gradually into the Wolfman. And I just remember as a kid, I was so mesmerized by that.
Yeah, that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about today, and we'll get into it. But before we do, Gar, I got to tell you, as I often do, most of these episodes we do, and prepping for today's show, just yesterday, I went and watched the movie again. I hadn't seen it in years. And what's funny is, depending on when you first saw the movie, because I remember as a kid being terrified of this movie. I've heard other people review the movie and talk about how scared they were. Now, of course, all these years later, I'm a grown-up, and I watch it, and even though this is considered a classic horror movie, I mean, the most scared I got yesterday was kind of, like you said, when he transformed from human into the Wolfman. But I was watching last night, and it's, for the most part, it's kind of an average movie in that, it does a great story of telling the story, but it wasn't like your classic monster horror film where you're terrified, throughout the entire thing, which I thought was kind of an interesting factor, being that this is a classic horror movie.
Well, even as a kid, I don't recall, being frightened.
Yeah.
Of course, to keep things in perspective, when they were showing this on TV, when I was a kid, they weren't showing it at night in prime time. They were showing it during the daytime.
Yeah.
Which kind of, that's why I have to say that, because that is a perspective factor, because you're not going to really be all that scared when you're not in spooky surroundings.
Yeah.
And that's part of the whole thing about watching a horror movie that's classic. We always equate that with the popcorn and turning out the lights.
It's funny you say that, because after watching the film last night, I had that immediate thought. I was thinking, okay, first of all, this is a film I've seen before, so it's not quite the same thing as going to the movie theater, having never seen it, and seeing it for the first time in the dark. That does play a big role. Even though I haven't seen it in years, it's not quite the same thing as seeing it for the very first time. I imagine back, in the early 1940s when this movie came out, people seeing it for the first time in the movie theater were terrified. Oh my God, because even I was reading and doing the research for this today, Gar, that this was the first time that such a movie had been made. I mean, of course, about 10 years earlier, the original Dracula and Frankenstein came out, but in that 10-year period, they had made a lot of improvements in even how to make movies. And so even just from a technical standpoint, you could see all the advances there had been in movie making in that 10-year period.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people don't know that there's a reason why Lon Chaney Jr. You can't take away the junior, because he is the son of Lon Chaney Sr.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know who Lon Chaney Sr. was, but Lon Chaney Sr. was an actor that started in the vaudeville days and gradually went into theater, and then eventually wound up going into making movies back in the early 1900s. 1910, 1920, and all of that stuff. And Lon Chaney Sr., what he brought to the table, because back in those days, in the early 1900s, they didn't have makeup crews and, all of that kind of stuff. And actors in movies, it was put on the actor to come up with, to do their own makeup. So Lon Chaney Sr., because he had a background in makeup, many, many years of doing makeup, it gave him a huge advantage over other actors of that same time period in the early 1900s. Because, the other actors, makeup to them was just putting on a beard. To show that they're the bad guy, or it wasn't elaborate.
Yeah.
And so Lon Chaney Jr.'s father was the huge influence in Lon Chaney Jr. having makeup as a part of his acting career too, because his father wasn't just a highly skilled actor, but he was also he shared his knowledge with other actors that he would be working with. So he was actually considered not just an actor, but a teacher too.
Yeah,
because there were a lot of famous actors that wound up working with him, that wound up giving him credit for them blossoming as an actor, or actually transforming them from just a person standing in front of a camera to actually acting.
And I'm glad
Lon Chaney Jr. has. It would be. I'm under the belief. I don't have anything to substantiate it, but I'm under the belief that he was taught by his father when he was in his younger, developing years.
Yeah, who knows? And
you see what I'm saying?
I'm glad you brought up
his dad had teaching qualities, and if he was sharing it with other actors, he had to have been sharing it with his son. Because Lon Chaney Jr. is one of the first of the Nepo babies.
Sure,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up.
But he didn't do his career capitalizing on his father, because his father had died somewhere around 15 years before Lon Chaney Jr. ever even started acting.
Yeah, I'm very glad you brought all that up, because, of course, I knew the father had been a successful actor before this guy. Now, what's interesting is I got the DVDs. I said I watched it last night. On the cover of the DVD, it just says Lon Chaney, Lon Chaney. So at first I thought that this was the father that initially had the role. Come to find out, it was his son, and this was like one of the son's first most popular roles, and we'll get into that. But again, on the DVD, it's just listed as Lon Chaney, and when I'm doing the research, the one that was in the movie said Lon Chaney Jr., so I kind of do a double take. I'm like, wait a minute, did I read this right? I thought Lon Chaney Jr., and in fact he was. And I think it was after this making of this film that he's added the junior, so people would not confuse him with his father. Now, again, to just give people a time frame, this is what I came up with in doing the research. It said, The Wolfman is a 1941 horror film starring Lon Chaney Jr. in the title role of the Wolfman. The movie was originally released on December 9th, 1941. And again, Gar, this was a Universal film. This was part of those classic Universal monster movies. And, of course, before this came Dracula and the Frankenstein monster. And then this was kind of the third one of those films, rolled out. And what's kind of interesting is it was shot, of course, on the Universal lot. And there's a little documentary on the DVD I have, and they were explaining that if you watch the movie, as you're watching the movie, it's hard to kind of tell like where it's supposed to take place. There are parts where you think maybe you're in England or somewhere in Europe, but it was all in fact shot on the Universal lot.
Yeah, one of these elements of movies from that time period that really added creepiness to the movies was the element of gypsies.
Yeah, that's throughout this movie. Yes,
and it's not just this movie. I mean, you can take a ton of movies that are made during that same kind of time period. And if they always seem to, when the movie was creepy, they always had the element of gypsies as part of it. And it really, truly did work because, how the gypsies would speak, just the whole thing just added this whole element of creepiness that you don't see in movies nowadays. That's an element from that time period has not been carried on through the years. And I think that if they did a new movie and still utilized, the element of gypsies, it could still have that creepiness because it really has, actors and actresses love to do those kind of characters because they're very expressive. And, you're really using your acting abilities to produce those type of characters. So for an actor, they're very fun to do.
Yeah, and what's fascinating about that is I'm watching the movie last night, and I didn't really kind of pay as much attention to that as you did, but I did pick up on the one that was supposed to be the head gypsy. Now, what's interesting, throughout my lifetime, whenever you see in movies people referred to as gypsies, it's more of kind of people, kind of strange, kind of weird people that maybe more associated with like living the carnival circus kind of life. People that are kind of really out there. Now, this was much more closer than what you'd typically see as a gypsy, like I described. Back in the day, going back to the Wolfman movie specifically, when I seen that actress that was playing the head gypsy, it was much more, they're trying to imply that gypsies were much more witch-like.
Well, and that's that creepy element.
Yeah.
That whole type of character brings to the movie. That it's just kind of I'm just pointing it out because I enjoyed those elements of those movies, and I think that is an aspect that is still usable today. If people that were creating movies today wanted to use it, and that's my point.
And I'm glad you brought it up, Gar. You know why? Because
complaint kind of thing, or this is something, blah blah blah. Yeah. No, it's really not that. I'm just pointing out it's an element that isn't being used today like it was being yesterday, but I think it's still a good usable element.
You know why I'm glad you brought it up, Garbo, is because I didn't write the lady's name down, but the one that played the gypsy that we're talking about in this movie, I was reading that at that time she was like a very famous kind of character actor, and that role in the Wolfman ended up being her favorite and her most popular role, I guess, in her entire career. It's the one role she's remembered for.
Well, I think everybody has their own favorites.
Yeah.
But I mean, I just remember as a kid, just watching the movie, and because the storyline, I just remember it was the first time.
Yeah.
And I just remember the storyline was so much different than the Dracula and the other ones that were considered in the same genre. But yet it was so different, and that's what I really liked about it. It wasn't another rehash of it really stood on its own. And usually people that are the son of another highly regarded actor, because Lon Chaney Jr.'s father during his time was an extremely highly regarded. And a lot, what people remember of Lon Chaney Sr., it was his scary movie characters. His most famous was Phantom. And if you look at the makeup that Lon Chaney Sr. did in the Phantom of the Opera, that what he brought to that, oh my God, even today it's still, you can see it is so creepy. But both Senior and Junior were not, even though both of them are known for their horror movie characters, both of their careers spanned
on their own
all kinds of genres of movies. Both of them did westerns. Both of them did, they did all kinds of movies. Their whole acting careers were not just horror films. Now, their horror stuff is what really stood out and has stood the test of time. But if you really look back, both Senior and Junior were very versatile actors.
Yeah, and Gar, in watching the film yesterday, another thing like you just pointed out that really stood out to me was this had much more of a story. I mean, let's talk a little bit about the beginning of the movie. It kicks off with the Wolfman title character, Larry Talbot. He's reconnecting with his father, Sir John Talbot. That's his father. Apparently they've been estranged. It doesn't really get into why, but Larry Talbot was off living his life for the last 18 years, and they hadn't seen each other for 18 years. And Larry Talbot returns home to Dad because after all these years, his brother was recently killed in a hunting accident. Doesn't really get much into that. Doesn't explain why they were estranged other than that. And then the rest of the movie is kind of how he goes into the store and comes across this cane, and it's the legend, and the girl tells kind of the legend of a werewolf, and this is what the story is. And then because he has that cane, that's how kind of that's the story that we're told.
And it just so happens to have the
pentagram,
the wolf head made out of silver.
Yeah. And then there's a star.
That's an important element.
There's a star pentagram, and what's interesting is, we're watching the film, and I'm not aware of this until after I watch a film. I watch a documentary on a DVD, and like the pentagram, because I guess the guy that created the story of the Wolfman, the screenwriter, he was from, almost his whole, family was killed by Hitler, and so that pentagram was a sign of that and what he lived through, and it's kind of. It's kind of interesting to think that, because again, I'm not thinking that while I'm watching the movie, and I'm really kind of getting into the story. Although the story's not that detailed. At some point, when Larry Talbot kind of realizes that he's become this Wolfman, he's afraid of what's going to happen, and the father just thinks his son, his only living son, has kind of gone crazy now.
Which is a typical reaction.
Yeah.
But it was really nice that they gave him a decent human being with empathy to his character, because when he discovered that he was afflicted with this, what he really wanted to do is he wanted to try to keep the beast from doing harm. You know what I mean? That was his personal. He was not. He was in conflict with, being the Wolfman.
Yeah.
And he was even fighting that aspect of himself and trying to do things to protect the safety of others.
Sure.
Which was a nice element to the storyline. You don't really see that in the character. It's more a fight for survival. But his element was less of a, was much more selfless and much more empathetic towards anyone that could be a victim. And I really thought that was a really, really good aspect to the storyline.
And I'll tell you why I think that happened, Gar, is because if you go back 10 years before, when the Dracula movie came out in 1931, that's the movie that launched these classic Universal monster pictures. And back in 1931, when Dracula came out and was made, movie making, it was just kind of in its infancy. Was really kind of they had just learned how to make movies with sound. And if you go back and watch Dracula, the interesting thing about it that people are able to even watch it is, for most of the film, it's just kind of Dracula talking to the screen, by himself. It's not a lot of dialogue through the movie. He's just kind of talking to the screen. Now, by the time 1941 comes around and the Wolfman's made, there's the movie's got a lot more dialogue. A lot of other people are in the movie. And movie making has really evolved. And what's interesting is, like Dracula and Frankenstein, like most movies we see, were actually based on books. I think like the Frankenstein movie was based on a book from the 1800s. So this, what I understand, was much more of a brainchild of a screenwriter, and it was originally written with Bela Lugosi in mind. And the thing was, so this was not based on a book. It's one of the first movies to be made that was not based on a book.
I thought it was really interesting that Bela Lugosi was actually lobbying to be the main character role. Mm-hmm. And what he wound up getting was just a bit part.
Yeah.
He played the heck out of that bit part because I loved his creepiness that he brought to that bit part. But it's just, it just shows the plummeting of his career at that time. He was, later on, it started becoming known that he was addicted to heroin or. Wow. Or that kind of thing.
Gar,
just had a lot to do with that.
Just think about that. I mean, that's something I never realized because it's so much before our time. But that's the first time I ever heard that Bela Lugosi was addicted to. I mean, to think heroin existed back in the 1930s and people were still struggling with drug addiction and alcohol. I mean, even you go back to, we did an episode on The Wizard of Oz with Judy Garland. We all know what she was dealing with at her young age, and she died tragically young. But to think that was still much a part of the celebrity lifestyle back then.
Well, back in those days, there was no regulation. With things like that to protect the public. So heroin was and opium and all that stuff was kind of rampant during that time. A lot of people don't talk about that nowadays. Yeah. But because there was no regulation to protect the public, it was common for people to be addicted and smoking heroin during that time. Yeah, and it's something that has truly been swept under the carpet. Because Bela Lugosi was just a symptom of that time period and how easily, if you had money, you could get a hold of that and you could become addicted. And people at that time had no idea that heroin was addictive in the first place.
Yeah, and Bela Lugosi, I don't know if you picked this up in watching the film last night. I did. Again, when these early films were being made in the 1930s and 40s, that the film would often start with the credits. Where these days we go see a movie and you'll see the credits at the end. And of course they list Bela Lugosi at the beginning because he's at that point he's a big star for Universal. He was known as Dracula, and it's interesting you say that we both learned that he was trying to get the part of a Wolfman. Maybe it's because he thought he was the first kind of Universal monster, kind of, I'm entitled because I'm popular, they know who I am, maybe I can get this role. But they chose to go with a different actor, which is interesting too, in fact that of all these Universal monster movies I was reading, Lon Chaney Jr. was the only one that played the Wolfman in 5 straight movies. You know, some of the other monsters were replaced by different actors down the line.
Well, you know, nowadays, because everything is faded, we look at Lon Chaney's career, and you know, if you look at his body of work, it is gigantic.
Sure,
all the different TV appearances he did, and all the movie, and all the, you know, going all the way up to, you know, his later years where he was appearing on game shows.
Yeah,
where I remember like him being on one where people guess what you do for a living. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think on the Wikipedia
things like that, and
I think
so his career was expansive. I mean, really expansive.
I think I seen on the
we only think about him
as a Wolfman,
as his horror movie depictions, and really the Wolfman. That's really all we remember of Lon Chaney Jr. And he really his father, Lon Chaney Sr., has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Wow.
And yet
he doesn't.
Junior has a larger body of work and is just as highly prestigious, and he doesn't have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
And yet, when I was researching this,
Junior does have a star on the Walk of Fame in Palm Springs. And if anybody, you know, wants to do a nostalgia, trip to Palm Springs and have that be, you know, on the checkmark list, that would be a fun thing to do, just to go see the star on the Palm Springs Walk of Fame.
Ah, wow! I never.
You know, it is his father that does, and Junior doesn't.
Amazing. And, you know, again, when I went on the Wikipedia researching, I was kind of thinking, you know, myself, how many films has Lon Chaney Jr. made? And it must be like over 100 things he did throughout his career, you know, that was listed on the Wikipedia. Now, a big part of this Wolfman movie, like I said, Gar, was the advancement in filmmaking, especially the makeup department. I mean, Universal, when they started making these these monster movies back in the 1930s, especially later on around 1940s when the Wolfman comes out, is the makeup was a big thing, and it was such a big thing that they started to have their own makeup, like their makeup division, if you know what I mean. They had this guy, Jack Pierce, for a lot of the classic movies. He was a makeup designer, and let me talk a little bit about this. It says the makeup that Lon Chaney Jr. wore to transform from man to the Wolfman took 5 to 6 hours to apply. Just to put it on, Gar, and it took about an hour or two to remove it.
Now, take that, and imagine how long it had to have taken weeks to do that, or at least a week to do that, because it was such a painstakingly slow process to do that. They had to do it frame by frame.
Oh, yeah. And
little bit by little bit to create this progression of him changing into the Wolfman. And as technology advances, so do movies.
Yeah.
And here's my 2 cents on special effects and stuff like that. For whatever it's worth, because my 2 cents is worth no more than anyone else's 2 cents.
Yeah, I'll take it though.
My 2 cents is that I really enjoy elements of the not so advanced technology of movies before things became CGI.
Yeah,
I really enjoy that, because there are elements to the older style pre-CGI that make it a little bit more believable, even though, there are aspects of it that is not quite as advanced and not as quite as realistic. But there are other elements that make it more realistic than CGI. CGI is so advanced and so perfect that you can tell it's CGI.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Sure.
When you're watching it. And my 2 cents is I think that they could do a better job if, instead of completely abandoning the old makeup methods and only going to CGI, I think they could do a better job and a more believable job by combining the two.
Yeah, and Gar,
I think there should be elements of the old and the elements of CGI that would make it much more believable when it's being presented to you right in front of your eyes.
Yeah,
you see what I mean?
Sure, and that was
to me, that was the element of watching the Wolfman, is because even as a child, they even though the technology wasn't very good, it was still believable.
Yeah,
you see what I mean?
Yeah, and I will tell you, Gar, a big part of this movie that I focused on in doing the research, not so much on the storyline, although that was a big part of the movie, but more on I focused on the makeup and exactly what Lon Chaney had to go through just to make this film. Let's get a little more into the details there. It's a Chaney reported that he was forced to sit still, motionless, frame by frame, as you were saying. Chaney also claimed that while the rest of the crew would break for lunch, he would have to sit alone, motionless, still wearing the makeup, while close-up shots of him in costume were being made.
That was, because the whole process was so much slower, they had no choice.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, that those are the downsides to the less advanced technology. But I would say, there, say for example, the special effects that they used in the 1980s version of The Thing with Kurt Russell.
Yeah.
You see, that is the older technology of makeup and all that kind of stuff, advanced to where it was in the 1980s. But yet it was so believable. And that's why, and it's just, all of that has become completely abandoned by movie studios.
Yeah.
And they've gone all in on CGI. And if they really, and I understand the reason why they're all in on CGI, because it's so much cheaper. But in the name of art, then art has nothing to do with profit margins.
Yeah, I think
in the name of art, they should combine the two, because I think they could produce a much more believable product now. That would be much more believable than just going all in on CGI.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, Gar, I think a big reason they have gone in on CGI specifically is because the world being what it is today, first of all, since a lot of this took place, back in the 1940s, as we're talking specifically today, studios wanted to prove that they move on with different technology, partly because for actors, safety. I mean, for example, we did an episode on The Wizard of Oz where we discussed one of the actors had to take off for like a 2 or 3 week period to recover because they had got some of the makeup in, I think it was the Tin Man, if I remember correctly. He'd got some makeup in his eye and caused a real bad infection. It took him like 2 weeks to recover. So there's stuff like that they learn by doing these classic movies. They didn't know all this at the time. They learned stuff along the way like anybody. And they're like, okay, we've learned from this. We don't want to repeat this. We want to have the actors and the people working on the movie, their safety in mind. We don't want to get sued, obviously. And especially today, there's social media. Anything like this was happen and somebody get hurt as a result or, even die from it. I mean, you remember when they did that movie with the crow and Bruce Lee's son was accidentally shot and killed? I mean, the world being what it is today, they got to be very careful how they even do any of this stuff.
Well, but most of what you're talking about is using CGI and action.
Okay.
Because that's where the danger is.
Yeah.
But what I'm talking about is in horror.
Okay, specifically.
Which is a little bit different than what you were talking about.
Sure.
And your point is very valid. I don't want to diminish it.
No, there's two sides to everything. I see that.
Yeah, but what I'm talking about is not using CGI for safety like in action movies.
Yeah.
But using elements of CGI for believability.
Oh, sure.
But also using the old makeup methods also for believability too. I think instead of just abandoning one and going to the other, I think I kind of see a potential where someone in the future is, I'm not going to be the only one that thinks this.
No.
And they're probably going to try it.
Yeah,
and it's a movie studios will shell out the coin anytime they find that something is successful.
Yeah.
But trying to get them to roll the dice on spending money, that's a completely different thing.
Yeah, what's interesting is
they will shell out the coin once they know something is successful.
What's fascinating about watching these classic horror movies like Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, they're all in black and white. And I do think specifically like the Wolfman, like you said, it looks authentic. I don't question that that's a werewolf, that's a Wolfman. It's kind of like filmmaking in its early days, like I said, yet there's a certain authenticity to it. And I know, like when they get later on into making movies and advanced technologies and stuff, they're all about, we want to make a modern day Godzilla. I prefer the prehistoric Godzilla, if you know what I mean. It's more of an authenticity to it, if you will. And here's another important fact about the Wolfman. It said, the Wolfman character has had a huge influence, Gar, on Hollywood's depiction of the legend of a werewolf in movies that would follow the now classic Universal monster film from 1941, the Wolfman. I mean, this is kind of where Hollywood kind of got its initial concept of what a werewolf was.
Well, yeah, but also when I was kind of doing the research for this, I kind of discovered that they were referring to this movie as Gothic.
Yeah, Gothic horror.
It really makes sense. That pretty much all of the movies from that era are Gothic. When you go all the way back to Dracula and the Mummies and all of this, that whole black and white genre of that time period is Gothic. And I really liked, that they put that, label on it.
Yeah.
Because it really gives, kind of a little more clarity to that time period.
That era.
In the movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there is a huge element. And the word Gothic, was not widely used to describe that during that time period.
Yeah, and
you know what I mean? Gothic is something a term that came many, many years later, many decades later.
Yeah, and
but it's a really accurate
description
label to put on virtually all of those movies from that time period.
And here's an interesting part of this story, Gar. As I said, oftentimes when we do these episodes, we learn that as movie making technology advances and stuff, they learn stuff along the way. Now we were talking earlier about how the fact that Lon Chaney Jr. complained about the fact when this Wolfman movie was made that he had to sit for hours in the makeup, and even the rest of the crew would go on their lunch break, and he'd have to sit there and have the close-up shots made. And because of all that complaining he did, they wanted, when they did these other future movies where the Wolfman was used, they wanted to find a way to make him much more comfortable, and they did. Now, but because of all this is an interesting thing. It says, and we also did an episode, you remember, on this time last year on Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein. Well, it said by 1948, when Universal released Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, the studio made a point to log their work and start having these studio logs to log their work. Showed during the making of Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein that the entire crew, including Lon Chaney Jr., took a 2-hour lunch break and stuff. And so again, because of what happened in the earlier Wolfman movie, they started, okay, in case anybody complains or anything, we're going to log our work. We're going to log stuff like when people take a break, how long the break is. And so just something as far as improving, I guess, people's rights or whatever, when they're at work making a film. That's kind of an interesting thing that I picked up on here.
Yeah, different times.
Yeah.
Where they didn't know as much as they, previous years, they didn't know as much as they wound up, knowing at that time. So, they're able to make improvements. And that's, that goes with virtually everything. You got, as technology advances, so do movies.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? And as that's as knowledge becomes more advanced, everything becomes much more refined. And that's basically the natural progression that we're all familiar with.
Yeah.
And it happens in virtually every aspect of our lives.
Sure.
Just as well as it winds up happening in movies.
And it will continue to be the case for forever and ever.
Say 20 years from today, technology is going to be much more advanced. And, the way that we watch movies 20 years from today is probably going to be completely different than what we do today.
And it's funny.
And, I think it has to do with, those things that people are buying and they're putting over their eyes. And you can play video games and you can do all of these.
Oh, virtual reality. Yeah.
Yes, VR.
Yeah, VR.
VR is going to eventually evolve into the new ways that we watch movies. And who knows? Who knows how movies could evolve in themselves.
I mean,
who knows? Maybe movies might become passé and shorter versions and all of that. Who knows? Because all of this stuff is left up to new societies to decide what they want.
Yeah, it's a beautiful.
Will probably be completely different than what we want today, because we live in a society with the technology is where it's at right now.
Yeah. In fact, the fact that this was shot on the Universal lot, that's another thing I was that they were talking about in this documentary on my DVD of the Wolfman. They're saying you notice that the kind of cars that were used in the movie, different. There's some scenes where they actually had actual covered wagons, and then so it looks like it's all from different time periods. It just kind of depended on the scene that it called for. I mean, even like you talk about, Gar, you talk about your own life that you and me lived. Just think of what we lived through, and you don't realize this as you're living life. But I laugh about it now. I think about today, you don't even see anybody having a rotary phone. I mean, I remember. That was a thing back in the day.
It was the norm.
And then we went from that to the big deal was getting a push button phone. And then like you said, you drive around, you don't even see You don't even see payphones or anything around. They're almost extinct. Every once in a great while you come across one. And then you remember when the big thing was people having pagers. That's almost non-existent, you know.
Yeah, and but that's
life.
That's the progress. That is progress. And as the future goes, technology is going to become much more advanced, and we can only speculate. Because nobody's got a crystal ball to predict the future. But I can say that watching how technology has progressed, and I think the really big thing that stands out about that is throughout my life, technology used to advance at a much slower pace. So what can take a year to make an advancement now used to take 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, you even look at
when I was much younger.
Yeah.
But that is how much faster technology is advancing now compared to the way it used to be. So that's why I'm saying is because technology is advancing at a much faster pace nowadays. It's almost impossible to predict how things are going to advance in the future.
I mean,
you know what I mean?
And you can
because
predict.
I only have data that's based on slower advancing technology.
I mean, you even look at you even look at how TV shows and movies used to be made, like those home video camcorders. Used to have those big VHS tapes that you tape stuff on. Now you got these home cameras that can store like 8 to 9 hours on a little zip drive disc, and it's just kind of amazing. That little tiny disc can hold so much, information on it. But I was also reading in reference to the Wolfman. It says the Wolfman was the only Universal monster to be played by the same actor in all of the 1940 movies. The Wolfman remains the most recognized version of a werewolf legend. Again, when people think of a werewolf, this is kind of where they initially got their first picture of what a werewolf was. And Hollywood has stayed pretty true to that. Yeah.
Well, whenever you look up in like a encyclopedia or anything like that, if you look up Wolfman, I'd lay money down that the picture right next to it is going to be Lon Chaney.
Yeah. And
you know what I mean?
Yeah. And it said
he is that iconic in that role.
Yeah.
Where, I guarantee you it's going to be his picture in that encyclopedia.
Yeah. And it also said the Wolfman, along with the Mummy and the Creature from a Black Lagoon, is one of 3 Universal monster movies that were not based on a book. Again, that's pretty kind of interesting, huh?
Well, I'm really glad you brought up the Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Yeah. Because
at that same time period that I was loving the Wolfman, I was loving the Creature. And those were low-budget movies from the 50s. And yet the Creature from the Black Lagoon they were real low budget. They were not big actors and they were not well-known. But the movies were highly successful because... during those years, the audience has not been subjected to everything that we have been subjected to. You compare, something you look at it now and you go, oh, that's not very scary.
Yeah. At the time.
When you go back in time, that society was not subjected to everything that we've seen over all of these years since. And they only have their mental digestion of it as to what they knew at the time.
Yeah.
Which is a very different mental digestion of what they were seeing. and so it's really hard for us to look back, because we look back with jaded eyes, because of what we've been able to see since. You know what I mean? And it's so much more advanced and everything.
And I think that's why.
But it's impossible to be from our time period and witnessing everything that we witnessed, and then look back at that and see it and mentally digest it the same way that people were doing way back in the 1940s. You can't do it.
I think, Gar, in reference to both the Wolfman and the Creature from the Black Lagoon, what stands out about those movies and those monster characters specifically is you go back to Dracula and Frankenstein. But like I said, those were based on famous novels, famous books by other people. And by the time those movies were first released in the early 1930s, people had an idea of what Frankenstein looked like. We had, most people at that time had a vision of what a vampire was. But the Wolfman, nobody had ever kind of envisioned what that was, or they might have envisioned, but hadn't really seen it. This is the first time they're kind of getting an idea of what that looks like, and it really set the standard for future kind of monster werewolf movies. The Creature of the Black Lagoon, same type of thing. Everybody kind of has an idea of what Frankenstein was to look like, and Dracula, who's a vampire and he sucks blood. But Creature of Black Lagoon, there had been no kind of monster, anything like that. I mean, maybe the closest they got was kind of Godzilla, but the Creature from Black Lagoon, I dare say, kind of really stands out because it's like a water monster, kind of,
Well, it really had an element of creepiness
and originality. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because, people were, what was scaring people at that time, and it's hard for us to mentally digest this, but, people were being scared by the creepy looking creature.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
With visually how creepy he was. And then, of course, you combine that with the element of black and white.
Yeah.
And then some of the photography being underwater, which even adds more creepiness to it.
Yeah,
you see what I mean?
Yeah, another thing.
There were some parts of the filming of it that were underwater when you were watching the Creature from the Black Lagoon.
And another thing to take in consideration that you don't really think of when you're watching these films, like I was reading specifically about the Wolfman, they were very concerned about how Christians and Catholics were going to respond to this back in the day. So that a lot of consideration in what the Wolfman was going to even look like, and what the character was going to be like, dependent on not wanting to kind of upset the Christians or the Catholic people. So that's another interesting aspect. And I do think, Gar, down the line, I see sometime next year in the new year, we're going to do an episode on the Creature from the Black Lagoon. I think that's kind of a must.
For, just for nostalgic reasons, you know what I mean? Because, like I said, it was a very low budget movie series.
Uh-huh.
What's that, Ed Wood? It's in the same category as movies that were made by Ed Wood.
And another reason,
he was so iconic for low budget movies that they made a movie about him starring Johnny Depp.
Yeah, I remember that.
He became famous for doing nothing but low-budget movies.
Yeah.
And Ed Wood didn't care how little money he had to work with, he would make it work.
And another thing, Gar, we got to talk about is, in doing an episode like that, I think, because the Creature from Black Lagoon, unless you're from our time period, I think, or before, that's a movie that's kind of still under the radar. People are starting to fade away. People doesn't even get played on late night TV anymore like it once did, and so a lot of people are forgetting about that. So I think there's a reason there to do an episode. And going back to Dracula and Frankenstein, when these monster movies were first being launched, you got to consider the fact that, like, Frankenstein, like I said, was based on a novel from the 1800s. So when these movies came out, like Frankenstein, people seeing that for the first time, you know, if you're a good writer, you're very, very able to get descriptive and give people an idea what the character looks like, what he acts like. But, you know, you're reading it on a page, and then the Frankenstein movie comes out, and we're seeing what somebody's vision of that is like for the very first time. And I think that's why those movies were also very successful, especially like Frankenstein, for example, being based on a book from the 1800s. We're seeing for the first time what Frankenstein actually looks like, and that's part of the reason it's so scary, because never seen anything like that before that.
Well, and when you look at the creatures from that time, you know, that was the scary element, was how they looked. You look at Boris Karloff's version of the Mummy, and it's the visuals that made it scary. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
Those visuals never existed before until they came out in these movies.
And that's the thing that people...
So it's you know, and that's why it's so hard for us to look back, you know, and look at it through the same lens as people that were, you know, living during that time and had never been exposed to what we see.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It had a completely different effect on them. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And it's hard for us to really
grasp
get our minds wrapped around that, but it's so true. And so, yeah, we look back at that and we go, that's not scary.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But we're looking through it through a much more jaded lens.
Yeah. And just to wrap up today's episode, Gar, this is a great place to do it. It said Lon Chaney Jr. would reprise his role as Larry Talbot the Wolfman in 4 more Universal monster films. And I think eventually going to have to do one on each of these. But to start with, Frankenstein meets the Wolfman in 1943. House of Frankenstein came out in 1944. House of Dracula, which also featured the Wolfman character, 1945. Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, 1948. I believe that was his last appearance. And it said Lon Chaney Jr. died of heart failure on July 12th, 1973. So that's a great place to kind of cap this, because I was also reading that with the Larry Talbot character, as he's reappearing in these other Universal monster movie films, there's some films where, like in this film, the film ends with the father kind of killing him, because he starts he turns into the Wolfman and he starts attacking the father. And he prior to that, he told his father, I'm really worried about, I don't want to hurt somebody. I'm going to give you this cane just in case. And the cane ends up kind of saving his father. But, Larry's killed as a result. And the interesting thing in these other... So Larry's killed by the end of the Wolfman. But then, again, he reappears in 4 other films. So because it's a monster movie and type, I was hearing that... They didn't even really have to explain how Larry Talbot comes back to life. It's just kind of one of those things. It's a monster. It just is able to happen, And interestingly enough, people don't really question that.
Well, obviously there was no uproar about it, so it went over.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Public, But I will never forget when I was a kid, way back in the 60s, and I went to that liquor store, and instead of buying baseball cards, I bought a set of cards that when I opened up the package, instead of baseball players, they were monster movie characters. And oh my God, I loved that set of cards so much that I remember it to this day. And I was like, we're talking probably 50 years ago.
Hey, Gar.
And I had a Wolfman card.
Wow.
I had a Creature from the Black Lagoon card. I had Dracula. I had the Mummy. All the classics, and they would even do some of the characters from some of these movies from that time period that were low budget ones.
Wow.
And stuff that that were actually really good.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I just can't. I can never forget about that collection of cards that I had. It was the only time I had ever seen that in my entire life. Never in all my other years growing up did I ever have anybody else show me their cards or anything like that. So it was the only time I had ever seen it, and it was a choice when I was a kid that I wound up picking that.
I dare ask, do you still have any of those cards?
Oh, no, I have no. I even, I even remember when I was older, my parents took me to a department store that no longer exists.
Yeah.
In West Covina. And what was special about that day is they were giving away basketballs, and those basketballs you could take the basketball up to the counter, and Jerry West and Wilt Chamberlain would sign the basketball.
Wow, that's going way back.
I had a basketball that was signed by Jerry West and signed by Wilt Chamberlain, and I have no idea what happened to that basketball.
Wow, what a life, Gar. Now, this was fun doing this. I want to wish everybody a happy Halloween this week. This episode we just did on the Wolfman is going to be going up next Saturday, which I believe is November 2nd. So you can check it out then. And, Gar, in kicking off our holiday season of holiday-themed shows, this was a great way to do it. And 2 weeks when we get back together, we're going to be doing one on one of your favorite horror movies, The Birds. And I'm looking forward to that because, again, I'm going to watch it so I can prepare for that.
I can't wait.
But I never.
I can't wait.
I mean, I urge people if they haven't seen it to go see it, and you'll never look at pigeons again in the same way. Yeah.
If you have never seen this movie, it is a must-see. It is still just as scary and creepy today as it was the day that it came out.
And it makes it a great film. That's why Alfred Hitchcock, when people bring up that name, this along with Psycho is one of the movies that he's always remembered for.
Yeah, well, he's got a lot larger body of work than that.
Oh, sure,
but,
sure.
But yeah, I mean, man, The Birds scared the crap out of people when it came out.
Yeah.
I mean, it had the same effect on the public that Jaws had.
And Gar, I dare say...
People don't remember that.
I dare say that, Gar, we'll get into this when we do the episode on The Birds in 2 weeks, but I dare sit here and tell you this. People are going to laugh when they hear me say this. I dare say The Birds is a lot more scary of a movie than The Wolfman.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
But Alfred Hitchcock had refined the genre.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why is basically almost everything he touched turned to gold.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
We will get into Gar. You have a nice rest of the day, and thanks for doing a little earlier than usual. I really appreciate it. You have a great day, my friend.
You too, brother.
Hey, bye-bye.